Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku awakened the Shadowborne Quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The final bell of Aldera Junior High didn't so much signal freedom as it did the start of a countdown. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the timer on his daily race against humiliation. He hunched his shoulders, making himself as small as possible, a skill he'd honed to a miserable art form. The goal was to become human static, to blend into the background chatter and shuffling feet until he could escape the building. His fingers nervously scrolled through the hero news feed on his phone, a worn device that was his portal to a world he desperately wanted to join. Kamui Woods foils another robbery, rescue ratings up 5%. MT Lady's debut continues to cause property damage debates. He absorbed the data, his mind automatically cross-referencing it with his own handwritten analyses in Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. It was a familiar, comforting ritual, a mental fortress against the casual cruelty of his peers. Still at it, huh? The voice, dripping with condescending amusement, cut through his concentration like a razor. Izuku flinched, his head snapping up. One of Katsuki Bakugo's ever-present cronies, the one with the long fingers, was sneering down at him, snatching the notebook from his desk before he could react. Hero Analysis for the Future? The boy read aloud, guffawing. Seriously? You're still pretending? The second crony joined in, his laughter a harsh bark. Give it up, Deku. It's just sad now. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Give it back, he mumbled, his voice a feeble squeak. Then came the presence that always sucked the air out of the room. Katsuki Bakugo approached, hands stuffed in his pockets, his red eyes simmering with a lazy, confident malice. He plucked the notebook from his friend's grasp, his gaze flicking over the cover with profound disdain. We're not done talking yet, Deku, Bakugo growled, his voice low and dangerous. Izuku's blood ran cold. He remembered the teacher's earlier announcement, the careless words that had painted a target on his back. Oh, Midoriya, you're aiming for Yui too, aren't you? The silence that had followed, then the explosion of mocking laughter, still echoed in his ears. Bakugo's hand sparked, miniature explosions crackling in his palm like angry firecrackers. He placed it on the notebook. Izuku watched in frozen horror as his hero, the symbol of victory, casually incinerated his dreams. The smell of burnt paper and singed plastic filled his nostrils. A small, choked sound escaped Izuku's throat. With a flick of his wrist, Bakugo tossed the smoking ruin out the open window. You know, he said, his voice deceptively calm as he turned back to Izuku, a thin trail of smoke curling from his palm. Most top heroes show signs of greatness even in their school days. I'll be the first and only hero from this shitty school. The story of a modern-day All Might. He leaned in close, his expression twisting into a cruel smirk. So don't you dare apply to UA, you quirkless reject. He placed a heavy, warm hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat a palpable threat. If you want a quirk so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with one in your next life. The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted, sounds blurring into a dull roar. He could feel Bakugo's cronies snickering behind him, but all he could see were Bakugo's red eyes, devoid of any pity, any shred of the friendship they once shared. Bakugo and his lackeys sauntered out, their laughter echoing down the hall, leaving Izuku alone in the suffocating silence of the classroom. For a long moment he didn't move. A swan dive. He felt a terrifying, hollow emptiness where his hope used to be. He finally shuffled out of the school, his feet dragging. He found his notebook in the koi pond outside, the pages swollen and ink-bled, the fish nibbling at the charred edges as if it were common refuse. He clutched it to his chest, the dampness seeping through his uniform, a cold mirror of the despair flooding his soul. He's right, a traitorous voice whispered in his mind. It's pathetic. It's hopeless. No one has ever become a hero without a quirk. He was walking through an underpass, the path home he'd taken 1,000 times, when the world dissolved into foul-smelling, suffocating green. A gurgling, monstrous voice echoed around him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, you'll do perfectly. Slime, thick and viscous, forced its way down his throat, into his nose. It was like drowning on dry land. His lungs burned. Panic, pure and primal, seized him. His hands scrabbled uselessly at the fluid monster that was consuming him. Black spots danced in his vision. I'm dying. This is it. I'm going to die in a tunnel, choking on sewage. His life wasn't flashing before his eyes. There was only darkness, the stench of sludge, and a profound, crushing regret. Somebody, anybody. Boom! A concussive blast of wind tore the sludge villain apart. Sunlight streamed back into the underpass. Izuku collapsed to the ground, coughing and gagging, sweet, clean air filling his aching lungs. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears. A silhouette stood against the light, impossibly large, impossibly familiar. Two prominent tufts of golden hair, a shadow that seemed to smile. Have no fear, for I am here. It was him. It was All Might. The world seemed to snap back into vibrant, impossible color. Izuku's fanboy brain rebooted, overriding the terror. All Might was here. He was real. He had saved him. The hero moved in a blur, efficiently trapping the splattered villain in a pair of soda bottles. All is well, young man. I must apologize for getting you caught up in my jaunt for justice. All Might boomed, his smile a literal beacon. All Might, Izuku stammered, fumbling for his notebook, his ruined, waterlogged notebook. Can you please, an autograph? Of course. The hero had already signed it with a flourish before Izuku could even properly ask. It was too much. The shock, the near-death experience, the sheer, overwhelming presence of his idol. His mind was a whirlwind. This was his chance. This was the moment. The question that had defined his entire existence was perched on his lips, a desperate prayer. Wait! I have to ask you something! Izuku cried as All Might prepared to leap away. No time, young man! A hero's work is never done! Panic trumped reason. In a move of pure, unadulterated desperation, Izuku lunged and grabbed onto All Might's leg just as the hero launched himself into the sky. The wind howled past him, tearing at his clothes. Hey! Let go! Your fanaticism is a bit much! All Might yelled, trying to pry him off. If I let go, I'll die! Izuku shrieked, his voice thin in the rushing air. Oh! Right. They landed roughly on a nearby rooftop. Izuku's legs felt like jelly. He was trembling from head to toe, a cocktail of adrenaline and awe. That was reckless, young man. Bang on the door for a while, someone will let you down. All Might said, turning to leave again. Please wait! Izuku shouted, his voice cracking. Just one question! All Might paused, his back to him. Izuku took a deep breath, his entire life, every hope and every taunt, leading to this single moment. Is it possible to become a hero, even if I don't have a quirk? He cried out, his eyes screwed shut. I'm a normal kid without any powers. Could I ever hope to be someone like you? Silence. The wind whistled over the rooftop, cold and lonely. Izuku dared to open his eyes. All Might was still, his broad back a wall of golden muscle. Then the hero turned. The smile was gone. His face was shadowed, weary. Without a quirk? All Might's voice was softer now, devoid of its usual booming cadence. He looked at Izuku, truly looked at him, and saw the desperate, pleading hope in his eyes. He saw a fragile thing that he was about to break. Pros are always putting their lives on the line, All Might said, his tone heavy. We fight villains that can't be beaten by good intentions alone. It's a dangerous reality. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. No. I cannot simply say you can be a hero without a power. The words were quiet, but they landed like a physical collapse. The vibrant colors All Might had brought back to Izuku's world leached away, leaving behind a bleak, washed-out gray. The hero's form seemed to waver. It's not wrong to dream. All Might continued, his voice softening with a pity that felt worse than Bakugo's scorn. But you have to be realistic, young man. You can help people in other ways. Become a police officer. They get a bad rap, but it's a fine and respectable profession. Or a doctor. You can save people without throwing yourself into the line of fire. He didn't see it happen. One moment, the Titan of Justice was giving him a final, mournful look. The next, there was a sudden, violent cough and a plume of steam erupted from All Might's body. When it cleared, the giant was gone. In his place stood a skeletal man, swimming in his own clothes, with sunken eyes and hollow cheeks. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku stared, his broken heart momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. What? Who? You're an imposter! A fake! The skeletal man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I assure you, I am All Might. He sighed and lifted his t-shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that dominated the left side of his torso. It was a vortex of ruined flesh, a starburst of pain permanently etched into his skin. Got this in a fight 5 years back. My stomach was destroyed. My respiratory system is shot. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, this is me. The truth was a second, more devastating blow. All Might, the symbol of peace, the invincible pillar of society, was broken. Wounded. Mortal. You have to be realistic. The hero repeated, his words now carrying a new, terrible weight. He was speaking from experience. From pain. He wasn't just crushing a dream. He was trying to save a life. He gave Izuku a final, tired nod, turned, and walked towards the rooftop door, his footsteps shuffling and weak. Izuku stood alone on the rooftop, the wind a mournful cry in his ears. The world felt silent. His ears were ringing. Take a swan dive. You have to be realistic. The two sentences, one from his tormentor and one from his idol, swirled together into a toxic sludge of despair that was far more suffocating than the villain had been. It was over. The dream was dead, and its ghost was All Might's emaciated form and Bakugo's cruel laughter. The walk home was a blur. Izuku's feet moved on autopilot, carrying his hollow shell through the bustling streets. The sounds of the city were distant and muted, as if he were underwater. He clutched the damp, ruined notebook to his chest, its weight a constant reminder of his folly. Then, a sound broke through the fog. An explosion. Distant, but sharp. Normally, his instincts would have taken over. He'd be running towards the sound, his mind already whirring, notebook at the ready. But today, there was nothing. No spark. No excitement. What was the point? He wasn't a hero. He couldn't be a hero. He was just Deku. Useless. He kept walking, determined to go home, crawl into bed, and maybe never get out. But his path intersected with the chaos. A crowd had gathered at the end of a narrow commercial alleyway. Smoke billowed into the sky. People were shouting, pointing their phones. Some deep, vestigial part of him, the stubborn, dying ember of his heroic spirit, made him push through the crowd. His eyes, dull and lifeless, scanned the scene. Flames licked at the walls of shops. The heroes on the scene, Death Arms, Backdraft, Kamui Woods, were struggling. He's got a hostage! And the alley is too narrow for me to get in there! Death Arms grunted, trying to land a punch and being rebuffed by a wave of sludge. My wood powers are useless against this fire! Kamui Woods exclaimed, helping Backdraft evacuate civilians. Izuku's gaze drifted to the source of the chaos. A familiar, swirling mass of green sludge. The same villain that had attacked him. But how? He looked at his own pocket, then remembered. When I grabbed onto All Might's leg, the bottles must have fallen out. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, washed over him. This was his fault. And then he saw it. Thrashing within the suffocating goo, two eyes, wide with terror and rage. Spiky blonde hair. Kaken. The world snapped back into sharp, terrifying focus. Bakugo, the boy who seemed invincible, the one who walked with the confidence of a god, was drowning. His explosions, which should have been his salvation, were only setting the surrounding area on fire, making it impossible for the other heroes to approach. He was struggling, suffocating, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. It was a look Izuku had never seen on him before. And in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya shattered. It wasn't a heroic impulse. It wasn't a plan. It was the culmination of a lifetime of pain, compressed into a single, unbearable second. The image of Bakugo's terrified face. The echo of his taunt, "Take a swan dive." The memory of All Might's broken form and his final, crushing words, "Be realistic." The suffocating feeling of the sludge in his own throat, the weight of his own failure, his own fault. Despair. Helplessness. Terror. Rage. An agony so profound it felt like his soul was being torn apart. He didn't move. His legs were still rooted to the spot, trembling. But something else did. A strange coldness bloomed in his chest, a chilling void that snuffed out the heat of the nearby fires. It was an unnatural, absolute cold, the cold of the space between stars. The vibrant colors of the world seemed to dim again, not into the gray of despair, but into a deep, bruised purple. The sounds of the crowd faded into a low hum. He felt a new sense flicker to life, an awareness he'd never known. He could feel the shadows. Not just see them, but feel them as if they were extensions of his own body. The sharp, dark line cast by a lamppost. The deep pool of black beneath a parked car. The creeping darkness in the corners of the alleyway. They were all connected, a silent, waiting network, and connected to them all was his own shadow, stretching out on the pavement before him. It was no longer a simple silhouette. It rippled like black water. It deepened, becoming a patch of tangible night. Izuku stared down at it, his breath catching in his throat. It was alive, and it was listening. His gaze snapped back to the villain. To Bakugo. The villain's massive, fluid body shifted, revealing one of its core eyes, a grotesque yellow orb, gloating and malevolent, helpless. The word screamed in Izuku's mind. No. A different thought answered. Not his own. It was a cold, sharp, logical whisper that seemed to emanate from the chill in his bones. Not helpless. He didn't command it. He didn't even think it. He just felt it. A surge of desperate, focused intent, stop him. Make him let go. Poured from him, not into his limbs, but into the darkness at his feet. His shadow convulsed. A tendril of pure, solid blackness, impossibly thin and sharp, erupted from the base of his feet. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't liquid, it was the texture of solidified night, a sliver of obsidian void given form. It shot forward, not along the ground, but through the air, silent and swift. It covered the 30-foot distance in an instant. Thwack. The sound was wet and sickeningly soft, but it cut through the din of the explosions. The shadow tendril, impossibly solid, had struck the sludge villain directly in its large, vulnerable eye. The monster roared, a gurgling shriek of pure agony. Its entire body spasmed, the fluid form contracting violently. For a crucial second, its grip on Bakugo loosened. Air. Bakugo managed to gasp a single, ragged breath, his own explosion sputtering. The tendril of darkness dissolved into nothing, like smoke caught in the wind. No one knew where it came from. Death Arms flinched, thinking it was a new attack. Kamui Wood scanned the rooftops. The crowd murmured in confusion, but Izuku knew. He stared at his feet, at his perfectly normal, stationary shadow. He looked at his trembling hands. There was a faint, cold residue clinging to them, like frost, that quickly faded. A phantom chill lingered in his veins. He felt a connection to the darkness around him, a low, constant whisper at the edge of his hearing, like the murmur of a distant, hidden ocean. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling. What was that? What did I do? This wasn't a quirk like Bakugo's fire or Uraraka's zero gravity. This felt other. It was born from the ugliest, most painful moment of his life. It was cold. It was silent. It felt hungry. A new kind of terror, far more personal and profound than any villain could inspire, seized him. He wasn't afraid of the monster anymore. He was afraid of himself. He was afraid of the shadow that was now staring back at him. Just then, a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. The skeletal, withered form of Toshinori Yagi. His eyes were wide with shock and self-recrimination. He had seen the commotion. He had seen the villain he let escape. He saw Bakugo, and from the corner of his eye, he saw a boy with wild green hair, stumbling back from the crowd, his face a mask of absolute, soul-shaking terror directed not at the villain, but at his own two hands. That boy, Toshinori's jaw clenched. Pathetic, he thought, not about Izuku, but about himself. He had lectured the boy about realism while a villain he was responsible for was about to kill someone. He had let his own weakness make him a hypocrite. With a grunt of effort, his body began to swell. Steam billowed around him as muscle and might flooded back into his withered frame. "I really am pathetic," All Might murmured to himself, the sound lost as his body expanded to its heroic proportions. Then, his voice boomed, shaking the very foundations of the street. "Texas!" Smash! A hurricane of pure force ripped through the alley. The wind pressure alone was enough to extinguish the fires and blast the sludge villain into 1,000 harmless droplets. The sky, which had been choked with smoke, was suddenly, impossibly clear. It started to rain. The day was saved. The crowd roared. Bakugo was safe, coughing on the ground. And Izuku Midoriya stood frozen, unnoticed in the chaos, his world turned completely, irrevocably dark. The aftermath was a whirlwind of noise and motion. Paramedics checked on Bakugo, who was already shouting and cursing at them. The other heroes, looking somewhat abashed, were praised by the media for containing the situation. Izuku, meanwhile, was trying to slip away, to disappear back into the anonymity he had craved just an hour before. The cold feeling in his chest had subsided to a dull, throbbing hum, a constant, chilling reminder of the thing that now lived inside him. "You! Young man!" The voice cut through the noise. It wasn't the booming baritone of All Might, but the reedy, tired voice of Tashinori Yagi. The skeletal hero, having slipped away from the press, was jogging towards him, looking even more haggard than before. But before Tashinori could reach him, Izuku was swarmed. "You were incredible!" a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in his face. "Did you see where that attack came from? The black whip thing." "What was that, Quirk?" another asked. Izuku froze like a deer in headlights, stammering, unable to form a coherent thought. I just... Enough! A powerful hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was All Might, back in his full glory, his smile wide but his eyes fixed on Izuku with an unnerving intensity. "The boy is in shock. Give him some space. I need to have a word with him about the dangers of civilian interference." It was a flimsy excuse, but coming from the symbol of peace, it was law. The press backed off, grumbling. All Might steered the trembling Izuku away from the scene, his grip firm but not painful. They walked in silence, turning down side streets and back alleys, until the noise of the main road was a distant memory. They ended up on another rooftop, this one lower, overlooking a quiet residential area as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The instant they were alone, the steam erupted from All Might's form once more, and he deflated back into the gaunt figure of Tashinori Yagi. He leaned heavily against the railing, coughing into his hand. "All right, kid," he said, his voice raspy. "No more reporters. No more crowds. Just you and me. Talk to me." Izuku couldn't meet his eyes. He stared at his own scuffed red sneakers. I'm sorry," he whispered. "It was my fault. The villain, it escaped because of me." Tashinori sighed, a long, weary sound. "Some of that is on me. I was careless. But that's not what I want to talk about." He pushed himself off the railing and took a step closer. His gaze was sharp, analytical. "Back there. I saw you. Before I transformed. Something shot out from you. A whip, a tendril, made of shadow. It struck the villain in the eye. That's what gave the other boy a chance to breathe. That's what gave me the time to step in." He paused, letting his words hang in the cool evening air. "I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. It seems I was mistaken about your situation." Izuku flinched as if struck. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I don't know what it is," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been quirkless my whole life. The doctors, the tests, everyone said so. And then I saw Kaken, and I felt so helpless, and angry, and scared, and it just happened." He looked down at his hands, half expecting to see them wreathed in darkness. "It felt cold. Wrong." Tashinori's expression was grim. He had seen countless quirks in his long career. Some were blessings. Some were curses. Some, the most dangerous ones, were intrinsically tied to the user's darkest emotions. A power born from darkness and fear, he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. He looked at Izuku, at this terrified boy who had just instinctively wielded a power he didn't understand to save his own bully. The heroic spirit he had dismissed earlier was undeniably there, shining like a lighthouse in a storm. But the nature of the storm itself was what worried him. "Listen to me, kid," he said, his tone deadly serious. "What you have, it's powerful. I could feel it from across the street. It's also dangerous. Quirks can influence their user's personality. A fire quirk might give someone a hot temper. An ice quirk, a cooler demeanor. A power like yours, one that responds to despair and thrives in the dark, it can be a slippery slope. It can pull you towards isolation, towards a colder, more ruthless way of thinking." He took another step closer, his sunken eyes boring into Izuku's. "The question is no longer can you be a hero. You have the power. You have the heart. I saw that today. When your legs moved on their own, that's what every true hero has in common. My question is different." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a gravity that made the world seem to hold its breath. "A power like that, a power born from darkness, can it truly be used to save people? Or will it inevitably consume its wielder and turn him into the very thing he fights against?" The question hung in the air between them, a terrifying, monumental challenge. It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't a rejection. It was a test. Izuku looked up, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For the first time all day, a flicker of something other than fear or despair sparked within him. All Might, his hero, was asking him if his dark, terrifying new power could be heroic. He wasn't telling him it was villainous. He was asking. He was giving him a choice. He thought of the coldness, the silent whispers, the feeling of wrongness. But he also thought of Bakugo's gasp for air. He thought of the villain's pained roar, of the moment its grip had loosened. It had worked. It had helped. His analytical mind, the one he'd honed through years of studying heroes, suddenly kicked into gear, cutting through the emotional turmoil. "Any quirk can be villainous," Izuku said, his voice shaking but gaining a sliver of confidence. "Endeavor's quirk is just fire, but he causes so much damage. Gang Orca looks like a villain, but he's one of the highest-rated heroes for his effectiveness. It's not the power." He met All Might's gaze, a fire of pure, desperate determination igniting in his eyes. "It's the user. It's their intent. This power, it scares me. But if it can help me save people who are in trouble, if it can save someone when no one else can, then I have to learn. I have to control it. I'll prove it. I will prove that even a power born from darkness can be used to bring people into the light." A long silence stretched between them. Toshinori Yagi stared at the boy, at the tears streaming down his face mixing with a resolve harder than steel. He saw the fear, but he also saw the unshakable will. He saw the darkness of the quirk, but he saw the brilliant, burning light of the soul that wielded it. A slow smile spread across Toshinori's tired face. It wasn't the beaming, camera-ready smile of All Might. It was something smaller, more genuine, and infinitely more meaningful. He saw the heart of a hero. And he saw a vessel, one that might just be strong enough not only to bear the torch he had carried for so long, but to tame the shadows that now clung to it. "A power to bring people into the light," he repeated softly. "Well said, young man." He straightened up, a new, risky, and perhaps brilliant idea taking root in his mind. The day was ending, the shadows were growing long, and for Izuku Midoriya, the world was no longer just black and white. It was a complex tapestry of light and dark, and he was standing right at the center of it all. "My boy," All Might said, his voice filled with a new, strange hope. "I think our conversation is just getting started." The world from the rooftop was a tapestry of encroaching twilight. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the pavement below. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya didn't see them as mere absences of light. He saw them as territory. A vast, interconnected kingdom of darkness that he was now, terrifyingly, a part of. He stood beside the skeletal form of All Might, the hero's words still echoing in the space between them. A power like that, can it truly be used to save people? It wasn't an accusation, it was a challenge, heavy with the weight of a lifetime spent on the front lines of heroism. Izuku's hands were trembling, not just from the evening chill, but from the phantom cold that still thrummed deep within his marrow. He stared at his own shadow, a stark, flat shape melded with the greater darkness of the rooftop. It looked so normal, so inert. But he knew better. He had felt it move. He had felt it answer. I don't know, Izuku confessed, his voice barely a whisper. The honesty felt like a betrayal of the brave declaration he had made just moments before. When it happened, it didn't feel like my arm or my leg. It felt separate. Alien. Like I was asking something else to do it for me. And it listened. Toshinori Yagi nodded slowly, his sunken eyes thoughtful. He had seen powers like this before, though rarely. Quirks that were more like symbiotic entities than simple biological functions, often with their own primal urges. They were volatile, unpredictable, and had a nasty habit of twisting their hosts into reflections of their own nature. Many quirks are tied to emotion, my boy, Toshinori explained, his voice raspy but clear. A user with an explosion quirk might have a fiery temper. A user with a mental quirk might be more introverted. They shape us as we shape them. But most are extensions of our will. We decide, and they act. He turned to face Izuku fully, his expression grim. What you describe is different. Your quirk seems to be a reaction, not an action. It was born from a moment of extreme negative emotion, despair, fear, helplessness. It responded to that. That is a dangerous fuel for a hero. He gestured out at the city, a sprawling galaxy of lights and darkness. A hero often has to be a beacon in the face of despair. They have to inspire hope when there is none. What happens when your own power source is the very thing you are meant to fight against? What will you do when you are afraid? And the easiest, most powerful path is to give in to that fear, to let the shadows lash out in anger. Izuku flinched. The questions were like surgical probes, touching on the very core of his new terror. He imagined being in a fight, panicking, and losing control. He imagined the coldness spreading, the whispers getting louder, until it wasn't him making the decisions anymore. The thought was more horrifying than any villain. But then, another part of him, the analytical, fanboy part that had catalogued thousands of hero fights, kicked in. It was a familiar refuge, a fortress of logic against a flood of terrifying emotions. But it doesn't have to be that way, Izuku stammered, his mind racing. He started pacing, his worn red sneakers scuffing against the gravelly rooftop. Look at Gang Orca! His quirk makes him look like a monstrous villain, and it's powerful and intimidating, but he's consistently ranked as one of the kindest heroes who's amazing with children. Or what about your own fight with Toxic Chainsaw? His quirk was literally creating poisonous weapons, but you said in that interview from 5 years ago that his downfall was his overconfidence, not his quirk's nature. He stopped, turning to face his idol, his eyes blazing with a desperate, intellectual fire. It's about control. It's about training. Any quirk can be villainous. Endeavor burns down half a city block to stop a purse snatcher. People get hurt by his heroic quirk all the time. This power. He gestured to himself, to his shadow. It's a tool. A dangerous tool, yes, but a hammer can be used to build a house or to crush a skull. The hammer isn't evil. The choice lies with the person holding it. He took a ragged breath, the momentum of his argument leaving him winded. I'm scared of it, All Might. I'm terrified, but I'm more scared of seeing someone else in trouble, like Kaken was, and being able to do nothing. If this cold, scary thing inside me is the only tool I have, then I have to learn how to use it for good. I have to. Toshinori was silent for a long time. He watched this boy, this trembling, tear-streaked, brilliant boy, who was already analyzing his own nascent power with the detached clarity of a seasoned pro. He saw the fear, yes, but it was overshadowed by an adamantine resolve. Izuku wasn't naively ignoring the darkness. He was staring right into it, and vowing to bend it to the light. It was the most heroic thing Toshinori had seen in years. This was the one. After all his searching, after all his doubts, the answer had literally fallen onto his leg from the sky. You have the spirit of a true hero, young man, Tashinori said, and this time, his voice held no reservations. It was pure, unadulterated respect. More so than many pros I know. You have proven that to me beyond a shadow of a doubt, he continued, his tone shifting, becoming something more profound, more significant. My quirk is not what it seems. It is not just my own. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, a power cultivated for the express purpose of defeating evil. It is the crystallization of strength, the sworn duty to save, the combined will of all who have carried it before me. He held up a trembling hand, a faint, ethereal light seeming to flicker within his palm. It is called One for All. Izuku's brain, already running at 1,000 miles per hour, screeched to a halt. One for all? He'd heard whispers of it on obscure hero forums, dismissed as a crackpot conspiracy theory, an urban legend to explain All Might's impossible strength. The idea that multiple people could hold the same quirk was a biological impossibility. One for all, Izuku repeated, the name feeling strange and momentous on his tongue. Yes, Tashinori said. One person nurtures the power and then passes it on to another. It stockpiles strength with each new user, a roaring bonfire of righteous power. It is this power that allows me to be the symbol of peace. And it is this power. He looked at Izuku, his gaze piercing. That I want to pass on to you. The world dissolved. The sounds of the city, the cool evening breeze, the very ground beneath Izuku's feet, it all vanished. There was only All Might's skeletal face, his burning eyes, and the impossible, world-shattering words he had just spoken. WHWHWHWA. Izuku's vocabulary completely abandoned him. His mind was a blue screen of death, unable to process the input. Him? Inherit All Might's quirk? The #1 hero in the world was offering him, quirkless no-weight shadow quirk Deku, his power? My time is running out, Tashinori said, his voice laced with a deep, weary sorrow. The injury I showed you, it has taken its toll. I can feel my strength fading day by day. The world still needs a symbol of peace. I have been searching for a successor, someone with a truly heroic heart to carry this torch. And today I found you. He saw the utter shock on Izuku's face and held up a hand to forestall the inevitable protests. This is not just a gift, young man. It is a decision I have made after seeing your soul. But now, with this new development. He gestured towards Izuku's shadow. The context has changed. The offer is no longer just here as a power so you can be a hero. It is something more. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your quirk, this Shadowborne as you've conceptualized it, is a creature of the void. It's cold, it's reactive, it's tied to your fear. One for all is the opposite. It is a sun. A blazing, roaring inferno of willpower, courage, and hope. It is the conscious, deliberate choice to save others, passed down through generations. It is warmth. It is light. His proposition became clear, a strategy so audacious, so brilliant, that Izuku's mind finally rebooted, trying desperately to keep up. What I am offering you, young Midoriya, is an anchor. A guiding light. A blazing sun inside you to hold back the encroaching cold of the shadows. With One for All's raw power, you will have the physical strength you need to be a frontline hero. But more importantly, with its spirit, you will have a constant, unwavering moral compass burning inside you, a bulwark against the whispers and the temptations of your other, darker power. You will have a light so bright that no shadow can ever hope to consume it, he concluded, his words landing with the finality of a judge's gavel. I believe that with One for All to guide you, you can not only master your Shadowborne quirk, but you can turn it into one of the greatest heroic assets the world has ever seen. You can become a hero who understands both the light and the dark. So, Izuku Midoriya, do you accept? Izuku's knees gave out. He collapsed to the ground, not with a thud, but with a quiet, boneless surrender. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of it all was too much to bear. An hour ago, his life was over, his dream was dead. Now, he stood at a precipice he never could have imagined. He not only had a quirk, a terrifying and powerful one, but he was being offered a second, legendary one by his personal god. It wasn't just a gift. It was a burden of cosmic proportions. To master one quirk was a life's work. To master two, especially two that were such polar opposites, it was impossible. It was insane. Tears, hot and unstoppable, began to stream down his face. They weren't tears of pure joy, like he might have imagined. They were a complex, messy cocktail of gratitude so profound it hurt, of terror so deep it felt like a physical chill, and of the crushing weight of a destiny he had never asked for but now couldn't refuse. He looked up at the gaunt man who was, in every way that mattered, the mighty All Might. He saw the hope in the hero's eyes, the desperate gamble he was taking on a worthless, useless Deku. Yes. Izuku choked out, the word torn from his throat by a sob. Yes. I accept. The next 3 days were a waking dream. Izuku walked through the halls of Aldera Junior High like a ghost, the taunts of his classmates barely registering. Bakugo shot him venomous, confused glares from across the room, clearly unable to reconcile the terrified weakling from the underpass with whatever he had seen during the sludge villain attack. Izuku just kept his head down, his mind a universe away. His nights were sleepless. He'd lie in his all-might-themed bed, staring at his own shadow and the sliver of moonlight filtering through his curtains. He'd try to feel it, to reach out to it with his mind, but there was nothing. It was just a patch of darkness, inert and silent. Yet, he felt its presence constantly, a low-level hum at the base of his skull. The whispers were gone, but the feeling of being watched by his own silhouette remained. He would jolt awake from nightmares where he was drowning not in sludge, but in a cold, silent ocean of pure black. His mother, Inko, noticed his strange, distracted state. She'd hover, her face etched with worry, asking if he was feeling all right, if something had happened at school. He'd just offer a weak, reassuring smile, a lie that felt like lead on his tongue. How could he possibly explain? Mom, I manifested a creepy shadow quirk born from despair, and also All Might is a skeleton man who's going to give me his superpower so I don't accidentally become a creature of the night. Finally, the call came. An untraceable number. All Might's reedy voice on the other end, giving him a time and a place. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. An hour before sunrise. Don't be late. Izuku arrived while the sky was still a deep, star-pricked indigo. The beach was a disaster zone, a mountain range of illegally dumped trash, from rusted washing machines to tangled nests of rebar. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay. In the pre-dawn gloom, the junk piles cast long, deep, and inviting shadows. Izuku could feel them, a faint thrum of potential that made the hair on his arms stand up. Tashinori was already there, leaning against a broken-down refrigerator, looking frail in the dim light. Good you're here, he said, his breath fogging in the cool air. This place is a disgrace. But for our purposes, it's perfect. Secluded, and full of opportunities for you. He gestured to the sprawling darkness. He then laid out the plan. The UA entrance exam was in 10 months. In that time, Izuku had to accomplish 2 monumental tasks. First, he had to prepare his body. One for all is a hurricane of pure power, Tashinori explained grimly. If you try to channel it in your current state, your limbs will fly right off your body. You are an unworthy vessel. You need to forge yourself into a container strong enough to hold the storm. His plan for that was the American Dream Plan. A grueling workout regimen and diet schedule that was, at its core, one simple, insane task: clean the entire beach. Izuku stared at the mountains of trash, his jaw slack. It was impossible. Second, Tashinori continued, his tone growing more serious. You need to begin understanding your own quirk. Shadowborne. Before you can even think about adding OFA to the mix, you need to get a handle on the power you already have. But how? Izuku asked, his voice full of doubt. I've tried. I can't make it do anything, because you're trying to force it with your conscious mind, Tashinori reasoned. But it didn't respond to your conscious mind before. It responded to your emotions. To your desperation. He grimaced. It's a distasteful method, but it's our only starting point. I want you to try and remember that moment. When you saw your friend trapped. The helplessness. The fear. Try to tap into that feeling, just for a moment, and see if the shadows respond. Izuku's stomach churned. Relive the worst moment of his life? Use his own trauma as a trigger? It felt profoundly wrong. But he looked at All Might's determined face and nodded grimly. He closed his eyes. He shut out the sound of the waves and the smell of the salt. He pictured the scene. The fire. The jeering crowd. The struggling heroes. He pictured Bakugo's face, the mask of rage cracking to reveal pure terror beneath. He let the feeling of absolute, soul-crushing helplessness wash over him again. The despair that had hollowed him out. A profound cold seeped into his bones, far colder than the morning air. The low hum in his head intensified, resolving into faint, unintelligible whispers, like voices from the bottom of a well. He opened his eyes. The world had gone dim, the colors muted. His shadow, cast long by a distant streetlight, was rippling. He lifted his hand, and his shadow hand mimicked the movement, but it seemed to drag, thick and viscous like tar. Good, keep focusing, Toshinori urged, watching with hawk-like intensity. Izuku focused on the feeling of cold, on the whispers. He pointed a trembling finger at a small, rusted can a few feet away. He imagined a tendril, like the one he produced before, but smaller. He didn't push with his muscles. He pushed with that feeling of cold intent. From the tip of his shadow's finger, a thin, wavering wisp of blackness stretched out. It was barely thicker than a thread, shaky and insubstantial. It reached the can, touched it, and then dissolved into nothing with a faint poof of displaced air. The can didn't even wobble. Izuku gasped, the connection breaking. The cold receded, the whispers faded, and the world snapped back into its normal, drab colors. He was panting, a sheen of cold sweat on his brow, feeling as if he'd just run a marathon. It's exhausting, he wheezed. But it worked, Toshinori said, a flicker of something, pride, or perhaps clinical interest, in his eyes. You controlled it. Consciously. That's the first step. He looked at Izuku's pale, drained face with concern. It seems directly tied to your stamina. And the emotional toll, we will have to be careful. Your goal for now is not to create weapons, it is to achieve control without relying on despair. Try to find a different trigger. Focus. Concentration. Not fear. He motioned for Izuku to try again, this time without the traumatic memories. Izuku closed his eyes, focusing only on the memory of the cold itself, on the hum. He reached out with his mind. This time, he managed something different. He focused on the ground beneath his feet, on his own shadow. He thought about sinking, about becoming one with it. For a split second, he felt his feet become weightless and insubstantial. He looked down and saw them sinking into his own shadow as if it were a pool of black water. He yelped in surprise, stumbling back, and the effect vanished. His feet were solid on the sand once more. Incredible, Toshinori murmured. Intangibility, or perhaps movement through shadows. The applications are endless. He clapped Izuku on the shoulder, his bony hand surprisingly firm. This is your life for the next 10 months, young Midoriya. By day, you will build your body. You will sweat and bleed and push yourself past every limit you thought you had. You will become a worthy vessel, and by night, in the shadows of the junk you've cleared, you will train your mind. You will learn the language of your darkness. You will tame it. He looked from the exhausted boy to the mountains of trash, then to the horizon where the first hint of dawn was staining the sky pink and orange. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done, All Might said, his voice imbued with a solemn gravity. You will be tempted to give up. Your body will fail you. Your mind will play tricks on you. The whispers may grow louder. But you must not falter. You have a dual inheritance, my boy. A legacy of light, and a quirk of darkness. Your journey to becoming a hero is to learn how to make them one. The first month was a special kind of hell, a meticulously crafted crucible designed by All Might to burn away the very concept of weakness. Each day began in the bruised purple of pre-dawn, with Izuku standing before the mountainous landfill that had once been Dagoba Municipal Beach. The air, thick with the miasma of decay and brine, was a constant assault on his senses. The goal is simple, young Midoriya, Toshinori had said on that first day, his voice raspy but firm as he gestured to a hulking, rusty tin refrigerator. Move this. Izuku, filled with a naive, nervous energy, had tried. He braced his thin frame against the cold metal, his worn sneakers slipping in the damp sand. He pushed. He strained. Every sinew in his body screamed in protest. The refrigerator didn't budge. It might as well have been a part of the bedrock. After 10 minutes of fruitless, agonizing effort, he had collapsed, chest heaving, muscles screaming, his spirit deflating like a punctured balloon. Toshinori had simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "This is your starting line. This refrigerator is the measure of your failure. Every item on this beach, from the smallest tire to the largest pile of scrap, is a weight you must lift. Not just to clear the beach, but to build your body into a vessel. One for all is a loaded gun. Right now, if you pull the trigger, the recoil will blow you to pieces. We are forging you into the cannon." And so, the days became a grueling rhythm of pain and perseverance. Izuku followed the American Dream plan with a fanatical devotion. He dragged tires, his back arching with strain. He hauled sodden couches, the fetid water soaking his clothes. He learned the specific agony of tangled rebar catching on his skin, leaving angry red welts that would sting for hours. He ate the strict, protein-heavy diet Toshinori prescribed, choking down food even when his body was too exhausted to feel hunger. All Might was an unforgiving drill sergeant. He'd appear in his muscle form for brief, explosive bursts of motivation, his booming voice echoing across the wasteland of trash. "Faster, young Midoriya! Do you think villains will wait for you to catch your breath? Push beyond. Go plus ultra!" Then he'd deflate with a pained cough, reverting to the skeletal Toshinori who would then offer quieter, more clinical advice about form and leverage. The physical toll was immense. Izuku would stumble home each day covered in filth, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, and collapse into a bath so hot it was almost painful, watching the grime swirl away down the drain. He was perpetually sore, a dull, full body ache that became his new normal. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a different kind of training began. The physical exhaustion was replaced by a mental drain that was, in many ways, far more taxing. After his mother was asleep, he would slip out, not to the beach itself, but to the shadowy alleyways near his apartment complex. This was the dojo for his other, secret self. His control over Shadowborne was pathetic. In the beginning, he could only access it by dredging up that horrible, helpless feeling from the sludge villain incident. It left him feeling hollowed out and cold, and the results were meager. He could create a wispy tendril that could barely nudge a loose piece of paper. He could sink his feet into his own shadow, but the moment he lost focus, he'd solidify with a jarring jolt. It felt less like a superpower and more like a nervous tic. Toshinori's advice echoed in his mind. Find a different trigger. Focus. Concentration. Not fear. So, Izuku began to meditate. He'd sit in the deepest patch of darkness he could find, close his eyes, and focus not on fear, but on the memory of the cold. He'd concentrate on the phantom hum at the base of his skull, the feeling of being connected to the darkness. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to untangle the quirk from his trauma. His first breakthrough came with what he dubbed Shadow Step. The alley he practiced in was about 40 feet long, with a single dim lamp at one end casting a long, sharp shadow from a dumpster. His goal was simple: teleport from his own shadow at one end to the dumpster's shadow at the other. His first attempt was a disaster. He focused, felt the cold bloom in his chest, and pictured his destination. The world dissolved into a brief, disorienting vortex of silent, freezing blackness. He reappeared not in the dumpster's shadow, but about 5 feet short of it, stumbling out of the shadow of a drain pipe and crashing face first into a pile of overflowing trash bags. The stench was overwhelming. "Okay, line of sight and distance are factors," he muttered, spitting out a coffee ground as he documented his failure in a new, secret notebook labeled simply Project S. Night after night he practiced. He learned that the brighter the ambient light, the harder it was to use his quirk. A passing car's headlights could sever his connection to a shadow, leaving him feeling momentarily dizzy and weak. Direct sunlight, he hypothesized, would be his ultimate Achilles heel. He also became intimately familiar with the quirk's mental toll. Whenever he pushed his abilities, even slightly, the whispers would start. At first, they were just formless murmurs, like a radio tuned to static between stations. He was so physically and mentally exhausted from his dual training that he easily dismissed them. Auditory pareidolia, his analytical mind supplied. My brain is just trying to find patterns in the noise. A side effect of overexertion, but he still documented them, a cold knot of anxiety forming in his gut every time he did. The end of the 3rd month marked a turning point. He stood before the same refrigerator that had so thoroughly defeated him. His frame was still lean, but the soft lines of a boy were gone, replaced by the hard, wiry muscle of a dedicated athlete. His shoulders were broader, his arms corded with strength. He took a deep breath, planted his feet, and pushed. This time, with a groan of protesting metal and a deep grunt torn from Izuku's throat, the refrigerator scraped across the sand. It only moved a foot, but it moved. He had done it. Tashinori, watching from atop a pile of tires, gave a rare, genuine smile. The vessel is taking shape, my boy. You are no longer pushing against the world. You are learning to move it. That small victory unlocked something in Izuku. The impossible was becoming possible. The two halves of his training, the grueling days and the secret nights, had been separate struggles. Now, his analytical mind began to see a bridge between them. His 4th month began the era of synergy. The task was to clear a massive section of smaller, but awkwardly heavy, debris, engine blocks, broken washing machine drums, twisted sections of fencing. Lifting each one individually was inefficient and draining. One evening, staring at a particularly stubborn engine block half buried in the sand, an idea sparked. He couldn't lift it, not yet. But maybe he didn't have to. He retreated to the deep shadow cast by a nearby pile of junk as dusk settled. The whispers hummed, a familiar, unsettling chorus. He ignored them, focusing. He reached out with his mind, not to create a flimsy tendril, but something solid. Something with purpose. He visualized a crowbar, thick and strong, made not of steel but of pure, solid night. In Umbro Construct. He named it in his notebook. From the deepest part of the shadow, a bar of absolute blackness began to form. It wasn't smoky or ethereal. It looked as solid as obsidian, absorbing the faint light around it. It was cold to the touch, the chill seeping into his skin even through his work gloves. With a grunt of mental effort, he wedged the shadow crowbar under the engine block. He pushed down, using the solid ground as a fulcrum. The engine block lifted, just enough for him to kick sand and debris under it, giving him a better grip for the next day. It was a revelation. His nights were no longer just about practicing flashy teleportation. They became practical. He learned to create Umbro constructs not as weapons, but as tools. Shadowy ropes to drag lighter scrap into piles. Solid wedges to hold precarious junk piles stable while he worked. He even used a flattened sheet of shadow as a makeshift sled, piling it with smaller items and dragging it across the sand, the frictionless surface gliding with eerie silence. His shadow step became more refined. He wasn't just jumping from one large shadow to another. He was chaining them. He'd step from the shadow of a tire, to the sliver of darkness under a piece of sheet metal, to the shade of a broken television, covering 50 yards in a handful of silent, disorienting blinks. It became his primary mode of transportation across the sprawling worksite, saving him precious time and energy. Shadow meld, the ability to sink into his own shadow, also evolved. One evening, hiding from the headlights of a passing security patrol, he melded into the shadow of a large concrete pipe. As he lay there, intangible and invisible, he felt a strange vibration. He could feel the footsteps of the guard walking 20 feet away, the vibrations traveling through the ground and being picked up by his shadow state as if it were a sensitive membrane. It wasn't just hiding anymore. It was surveillance. He was becoming brutally efficient. His progress on the beach accelerated dramatically. Tashinori watched, a mixture of awe and deep-seated concern on his face. "Your ingenuity is remarkable, young Midoriya," he said one evening, as Izuku used a complex network of shadow tendrils to dismantle a tangled mess of fishing nets. "You are thinking like a true hero, using every tool at your disposal." "But," Tashinori's gaze grew heavy, "you've grown quiet. More withdrawn. You spend more and more time working after dark. The shadows are your allies, but do not let them become your only friends. Remember the sun, my boy. Remember the light. Izuku just nodded, a familiar chill running down his spine. Tashinori was right. He did feel more comfortable in the dark. The noise and brightness of the day felt harsh, grating. The silence and the cool embrace of the shadows felt like home. The whispers were a part of that. They were clearer now, during his 7th and 8th month. He could almost make out fragmented words amidst the static, spoken in a voice that was ancient, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. Power, take, so similar. He documented it all, his handwriting growing tighter, more clinical. He theorized it was his own subconscious, personifying the Quirk's nature. The desire for power, the ability to take things, like life or freedom, a terrifying thought. The similarity to what? He didn't know. He was starting to get scared again, but he pushed it down. Fear was the old trigger. Control was the new one. He refused to be afraid of his own quirk. The 9th month arrived with the cold winds of winter. The beach was almost unrecognizable. Vast swathes of clean, pale sand now met the churning gray waves. But the final section remained. It was the heart of the landfill, a veritable mountain of the heaviest, most compacted refuse, crowned by a derelict city bus that had somehow been dumped there years ago. It was Izuku's final boss. His body was a weapon now. When he took his shirt off, he could see the results of his ordeal, a sculpted topography of lean, powerful muscle. He could deadlift the refrigerator with ease. His stamina was immense. He was a worthy vessel. His quirk was a part of him. The cold was no longer a foreign invader, but a familiar companion. The whispers were a constant background hum, a presence he had learned to ignore like the sound of his own heartbeat. The final month was a blur of relentless, obsessive work. The line between his day and night training evaporated completely. He worked from before dawn until long after midnight, sleeping in short, frantic bursts. He used umbral constructs to brace his aching muscles, wrapping his arms and legs in hardened shadow to push past the limits of his physical endurance. He used shadow step to move from one side of the junk mountain to the other in the blink of an eye, his movements a fluid, efficient dance of physical labor and supernatural ability. It all came down to the final 24 hours before the UA entrance exam. One section remained, the bus. It sat listing to one side, its frame rusted through, its weight immeasurable. It was the last monument to the beach's decay. "This is it, my boy," Tashinori said, standing beside him as the sun set, casting the bus in a long, dramatic shadow. "This is your final exam before the real one. Everything you have learned. Body and shadow, use it." Tashinori left him to his task. Izuku stood before the bus, the sea breeze whipping his green hair. He was more exhausted than he had ever been in his life, but a strange, calm energy filled him. He didn't try to lift it. That was impossible. He had to dismantle it. He spent the first hour using umbral blades, sharp and hard as diamond, to painstakingly slice through the rusted bolts holding the seats to the floor. He used shadow tendrils to pull the decaying seats out one by one, shadow stepping them to the designated recycling pile. The chassis was next. He used his newfound physical strength, straining to rip off rusted panels of steel. When a piece was too heavy to carry, he would generate a dozen umbral constructs to act as rollers, pushing the heavy plates across the sand with agonizing slowness. Hours bled into one another. The moon climbed high into the sky, casting the beach in ethereal silver and deep black. The whispers were loud tonight, swirling around him, almost coherent. He felt a strange sense of companionship from them, as if the darkness itself were cheering him on, urging him to claim this final victory. He worked on, ignoring them, focusing only on the task. The metal groaned. His muscles screamed. The cold of his quirk seeped into his bones, numbing the pain. Finally, only the stripped-down frame of the bus remained. It was past 4 in the morning. The sky in the east was beginning to soften from black to a deep navy. The exam was in a few hours. He stood before the frame, his body trembling on the verge of collapse. He had nothing left. No. He looked at his shadow, then at the long, dark shape cast by the bus frame. They were connected. He was connected. He channeled the last dregs of his stamina, not into his muscles, but into his mind. He plunged his hands into the shadow of the bus. He felt the familiar, freezing void. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled. He wasn't pulling with his arms. He was pulling with his will, with his quirk, trying to drag the shadow itself, and hoping the object casting it would follow. The bus frame groaned, a sound like a dying wail. The metal shrieked as it scraped through the sand. It was moving. He was pulling the entire 2-ton frame, inch by agonizing inch, using its own shadow as a handle. His nose started to bleed from the sheer mental strain. Black spots danced in his vision. The whispers roared, a deafening crescendo in his mind. But he didn't stop. He pulled and pulled and pulled, until finally, with a great, shuddering crash, the bus frame settled onto the massive pile of scrap metal he had designated for large waste. He collapsed onto his knees in the sand, gasping, every cell in his body screaming. He had done it. He looked up. The beach, from one end to the other, was spotless. The sand was pristine, washed clean by the tide. It was a perfect, beautiful canvas, and on the horizon, the sun began to rise. The first rays of golden light spilled over the ocean, banishing the last of the shadows. The light hit the clean, white sand, and the entire beach seemed to ignite in a blaze of glory. It was the most beautiful thing Izuku had ever seen. Footsteps crunched in the sand behind him. It was Tashinori. He stopped, his skeletal frame silhouetted against the magnificent sunrise. He looked at the perfectly clean beach, then at the boy kneeling in the center of it, covered in grease and dried blood, trembling with exhaustion but with a look of pure, triumphant victory on his face. Tashinori's composure broke. He pulled out his phone and showed Izuku a picture he'd taken 10 months ago, a scrawny, terrified boy standing before a mountain of trash. Then he flipped to a live view of Izuku now, kneeling like a warrior king on his conquered land. "Oh, my boy!" Tashinori's voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, my good boy! You did it!" In a surge of pure, unadulterated pride, steam erupted from his body and he swelled into his mighty all-might form, his laughter booming across the beach, a sound of pure joy. "You did it, young Midoriya! You exceeded every expectation. You are ready!" Izuku just wept. He cried from exhaustion, from relief, from the sheer, overwhelming catharsis of it all. All Might strode over and knelt before him, his smile brighter than the rising sun. "You have honored your promise. You have forged yourself in the fires of effort. And now, it is time for me to honor mine." His expression softened. "It may not be the most appetizing reward for your hard work, but..." He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "Eat this." Izuku stared, his tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of awe and utter confusion. "Ha! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA. That's how it works." All Might boomed, perhaps a bit too cheerfully. "Now hurry! We don't have much time before the exam." Izuku, his mind too fried to even question the sheer absurdity of the situation, took the hair. It felt like a hair. There was no glow, no hum of power. It was utterly, bizarrely mundane. He closed his eyes, thought of the 10 months of hell he had just endured, and swallowed. For a second, nothing happened. He felt the hair go down his throat, a tickling sensation, and that was it. A wave of anticlimax washed over him, and then it hit him. It was not a gentle transition. It was a cataclysm. It began as a feeling of intense, unbearable heat, as if he had swallowed the sun. A roaring inferno erupted in his core, a supernova of raw, kinetic energy. It felt like every cell in his body was being simultaneously struck by lightning. Power, pure and untamed, flooded his system, a wild, bucking hurricane of force that threatened to tear his newly forged body apart from the inside out. With the power came noise. A chorus of voices, not whispering, but shouting, overlapping, a symphony of wills and echoes of past lives, all screaming a single, unified purpose: save, protect, be the pillar. It was hot and loud and overwhelming and glorious. It was the radiant, blazing, magnificent power of one for all. But as the sun erupted within him, the void answered. The familiar cold of Shadowborne, which had been a constant, low-level hum, flared into an abyss of absolute zero. It was a silent, pulling emptiness that sought to consume the new, roaring fire. The whispers in his head, which had been a disordered chorus, snapped into a single, terrifyingly clear, and chillingly calm voice. It was the voice from his dreams, ancient and vast, and it spoke directly into the heart of his mind, reacting to the presence of one for all. A new power. A bright power. It fights. It resists. But the void is patient. The void is eternal. Izuku screamed, clutching his chest as he was thrown back onto the sand. He was a battleground. A blazing, roaring star of hope and heroism was at war with a silent, consuming black hole of cold, calculating darkness inside his very soul. He felt the warmth of 8 generations of heroes pushing outwards, and the chilling pull of an ancient, unknown shadow pulling inwards. He was a vessel for a sun. He was a gateway to the abyss. Kneeling on the shores of his first great victory, with the UA entrance exam just hours away, Izuku Midoriya finally understood. His journey wasn't about gaining a quirk. It was about surviving the 2 he now possessed. The train ride to UA High was a symphony of nervous energy. The carriage was packed with teenagers his own age, all buzzing with a mixture of bravado and barely concealed terror. They flexed their quirks, fingers that glowed, skin that hardened to a metallic sheen, hair that floated with faint static. Izuku sat hunched by the window, hands clenched tightly in his lap, a silent island in a sea of anxious power. He felt bifurcated. Split down the middle. In one half of his soul resided one for all. It was a tangible presence, a warm, heavy blanket of power settled deep in his core. It felt like potential energy, like a star waiting to be born. It hummed with the echoes of its predecessors, a chorus of courage and righteous will that was a constant, comforting reassurance. It felt like All Might's smile. In the other half, there was Shadowborne. It was a cool, quiet hum at the base of his skull. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was a watchful observer, a silent partner. It felt like the space between breaths, like the absolute stillness of a moonless night. When he focused, he could feel it connected to every shadow in the train car, a vast, invisible network of potential that was his and his alone. The whispers were quiet today, subdued by the bright morning light and the sheer overwhelming presence of one for all. They coexisted, the sun and the void, a delicate, volatile truce within the vessel that was Izuku Midoriya. He had a plan. A meticulous, desperate plan born from 10 months of analysis. His hero analysis notebooks were joined by the secret, black-covered Project S, and together they had outlined his only path to victory. One for all was a nuclear warhead. He couldn't aim it, he couldn't control its yield, and firing it would obliterate both his target and himself. It was a weapon of last resort, a break glass in case of apocalypse option. Shadowborne, on the other hand, was a surgeon's scalpel. It was precise, silent, and efficient. It was his key. He felt a pang of guilt. All Might had bestowed upon him a heroic legacy of light, and his first instinct was to rely on the creepy, villainous-looking power that had sprouted from his own despair. But it was the logical choice. It was the only way to pass without turning his own bones to powder. Control, not chaos, he repeated to himself, a mantra for the day. Precision, not power. As he neared the colossal gates of UA, a cathedral to his lifelong dream, his resolve wavered, replaced by the familiar, crippling awe. He was actually here. The air itself felt different, charged with history and greatness. He took a step forward, his eyes wide, and promptly caught his foot on an uneven paving stone. The world tilted. He was going down. His face was about to meet the unforgiving concrete in front of hundreds of other applicants. But before he could even flinch, the sensation of falling just stopped. He hovered, an inch from the ground, his body suddenly weightless. "Whoa, are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. He looked up to see a girl with a round, kind face and a permanent rosy blush on her cheeks. Her brown hair was cut in a cute, practical bob. One of her hands was outstretched, fingers pinky up, pointing at him. "Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking. But it would be bad luck to fall right before the exam, right?" She tapped his back, and gravity reasserted itself with a gentle thump. "I'm Achiko Uraraka," she said with a brilliant smile. "I'm super nervous. Aren't you?" Yes," Izuku stammered, his brain short-circuiting from the combined shock of almost falling and talking to a girl. He could only stare, his mind automatically cataloging her quirk. Zero gravity. an emitter-type quirk that nullifies the gravitational pull on anything she touches. Activation requires contact with all 5 finger pads. The blush might be a side effect of overuse, or just her natural complexion. Applications for rescue and mobility are immense. He was so lost in his mumblestorm that he didn't realize she was wishing him good luck and walking away until she was halfway to the auditorium. "Get out of my way, Deku!" The voice, low and full of gravelly menace, shattered his stupor. Bakugo pushed past him, not even bothering to shove, his very presence an act of aggression. His crimson eyes scanned Izuku from head to toe, a sneer plastered on his face. But behind the sneer, Izuku saw something else: confusion. A flicker of doubt. Bakugo knew Izuku was quirkless, but he had been there at the sludge villain incident. He had been the one gasping for air when that impossible black tendril had struck the villain's eye. He couldn't reconcile the two realities, and the cognitive dissonance was making his anger even more volatile. "Don't think you can stand in the same ring as me just because of some lucky fluke," Bakugo growled, his hands sparking in his pockets. "You're still just a pebble on the side of the road." The old Izuku would have flinched, apologized, and withered under that glare. But 10 months of hauling trash and wrestling with his own inner darkness had forged something new in him. He still felt a prickle of fear. Bakugo was a force of nature, but it was a distant thing. He had wrestled with literal demons in his own soul. Bakugo's temper tantrums were just noise now. Izuku simply met his gaze for a second, then looked away, not in submission, but in dismissal. He had bigger problems to worry about. The lack of a cowering reaction seemed to infuriate Bakugo even more, and with a final, frustrated "TCH!" the explosive teen stomped off into the building. The auditorium was vast, dark, and filled with the low murmur of 1,000 anxious whispers. The lights came up on a massive stage, revealing the voice hero, Present Mike, his signature sunglasses and gravity-defying hair instantly recognizable. "Welcome, one and all, to my live show! Everybody say HUYYY!" he screamed, his voice amplified to rock concert levels. "Silence, tough crowd," Present Mike muttered, before launching into the explanation of the practical exam. "You'll be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles in replica cities. You can bring whatever you want. After the presentation, you'll head to your specified battle center." The screen behind him lit up with silhouettes of 3 different robots. "There are 3 types of foe villains. You earn points based on their difficulty level. 1-pointers are easy prey, 2-pointers are a bit tougher. 3-pointers are the big leagues. Your goal is to use your quirks to immobilize these villains and rack up a heroic score." Izuku's analytical mind went into overdrive, his eyes scanning the schematics. "Okay, they're just robots. Not living things. That helps. The 1-pointers look flimsy, with exposed wiring around the joints. The 2-pointers are more armored but have obvious hydraulic lines for their limbs. The 3-pointers are bulky, probably slower, with a central sensor array, the eye, that looks like a primary weak point." His plan was solidifying. He wouldn't need brute force. Just precision. "And finally," Present Mike continued, his voice dropping ominously, "there's the 0-pointer. Think of this one as an obstacle, a gimmick. It's worth 0 points. There's no merit in taking it on. My advice? Run!" A massive, terrifying silhouette appeared on screen, dwarfing the others. It was a Goliath, a walking skyscraper. Izuku's blood ran cold. He instinctively assessed it through the lens of Shadowborne. Too big, too solid. The shadows it casts will be huge, but the machine itself, it's a moving fortress. No obvious external weak points I can reach from the ground. Umbral constructs would be like throwing toothpicks at a tank. That thing. I can't fight it. He's right. The only option is to run. "Excuse me!" A sharp, formal voice cut through the auditorium. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses stood up, chopping the air with his hand. It was the same boy who had chastised him for mumbling outside. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame upon this prestigious institution. And you, with the curly green hair," he exclaimed, turning and pointing directly at Izuku. "You have been muttering and distracting this entire time. If you are not going to take this seriously, you should leave. The entire section turned to stare at Izuku. He sank into his seat, his face burning with humiliation. He wanted nothing more than to shadow meld into the floor and disappear forever. Battle Center B was a breathtaking, sprawling cityscape, a perfect replica of a downtown district, enclosed by massive walls. The scale was immense. Izuku stood before the towering gates, surrounded by other examinees. He saw Uraraka a few yards away, nervously psyching herself up. He saw the boy with glasses, Ida, stretching with rigid formality. As President Mick's voice counted down from a hidden speaker, Izuku took a deep, steadying breath. He ignored the frantic energy of the crowd. He ignored the pounding of his own heart. He closed his eyes and focused on the two powers within him. He felt the roaring sun of One for All, and he mentally commanded it, "Stay. Be quiet." Not yet. Then he turned his focus to the cold, silent hum of Shadowborne. He reached out to it, not with fear, but with the calm, focused intent he had honed over hundreds of lonely nights. "It's time to work," the darkness answered. A familiar, welcome chill spread through his veins. And start! The colossal gates began to groan open. For a split second, everyone was frozen with anticipation. Everyone but Izuku. He didn't wait for the gates. His eyes were already locked on his target, the long, deep shadow cast by a skyscraper 100 yards inside the city. It was his landing zone. While the others were still processing the command, Izuku sank. His body dissolved into the shadow at his feet, and the world collapsed into a freezing, silent, instantaneous tunnel of pure black. The disorienting trip lasted less than a heartbeat. He reappeared, solidifying out of the skyscraper's shadow, his feet landing silently on the pavement. He was alone, deep inside the testing ground, the sounds of the other examinees a distant, confused murmur behind him. "What's this?" President Mick's voice boomed from the sky. "We've got a rabbit! One examinee isn't waiting for an invitation. The race is on, little listeners!" The hunt began. A one-point robot rolled around a corner, its single red eye swiveling towards him. "Target acquired!" It buzzed mechanically. Izuku didn't hesitate. He dashed forward, staying low. As the robot raised its gun arm, he slid, his hand brushing the ground. A whip of solidified night, thin and flexible, erupted from his own shadow. It lashed out, not at the robot's armored chassis, but at the exposed hydraulic hose at its elbow joint. The umbral construct, hard as diamond, sliced through the rubber and plastic with a faint hiss. Pressurized fluid sprayed out, and the robot's arm went limp, clattering uselessly against its side. A second tendril, this one sharp and straight like a needle, shot from the ground and pierced the robot's red camera lens. The robot froze, its head swiveling uselessly. Visuals, offline. Mobility, compromised. It droned before its internal lights flickered and died. 1 point. It was quiet. Anticlimactic. And utterly effective. A grin, sharp and predatory, touched Izuku's lips. It wasn't his usual smile. This one felt like it belonged to the shadows themselves. "It works." He became a ghost in the machine city. He flowed through the streets, his primary sense not sight, but his awareness of the shadow network. He felt the darkness under cars, in doorways, between buildings. They were his highways. Two-pointers cornered him in an alley. Before they could fire, he shadow-stepped from the alley floor to the shadow cast by a fire escape 20 feet above them. He was behind them in an instant. From the darkness of the wall, 2 umbral constructs, shaped like obsidian scalpels, emerged. They plunged down, severing the power conduits on the back of the robots' necks with surgical precision. They powered down, slumping forward like giant, metal puppets with their strings cut. 5 points. He passed a group of struggling examinees. A girl with a tail was fighting a 3-pointer, but 2 1-pointers were flanking her. She was overwhelmed. Izuku didn't stop to fight them for her. He ran past, and as he did, his shadow stretched unnaturally. 2 sharp, solidified spikes shot out, puncturing the tires of the 1-pointers, causing them to list and stall. He didn't even break his stride. "They're yours! Go!" he yelled over his shoulder, before disappearing into the shadow of the next building. He earned no points for it, but the look of shocked gratitude on her face was a reward in itself. The warm hum of one for all seemed to pulse in approval, a quiet counterpoint to the cold efficiency of his main quirk. In a darkened observation room high above the mock city, screens displayed feeds from every corner of the battle centers. A small, furry creature in a suit UA's Principal Nizu sipped his tea, his black eyes twinkling with delight. Well now, he's an interesting one. Nizu chirped, pointing a paw at a screen focused on Izuku. Examinee 7111. Quirk, unregistered. Beside him, the perpetually exhausted form of Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, leaned forward, his usual apathy replaced by a sharp, analytical gaze. He watched as Izuku melded into the shadow of a bus stop to evade a laser blast, only to rematerialize from the shadow of the robot itself, and drive a blade of darkness into its main processor. His application is flawless. Aizawa grunted, his voice a low rumble. He's treating it like a stealth mission, not a brawl. He's identifying structural weaknesses and neutralizing targets with minimal energy expenditure. Zero collateral damage. It's logical. But look at this, the R-rated hero Midnight said, pointing to another monitor displaying point totals. He has 45 villain points, all from precision takedowns. But his rescue point potential is 0. He's not saving anyone directly, just creating opportunities for them. It's ruthlessly efficient. Is it ruthless? Nizu countered, a wide, unnerving grin spreading across his face. Or is it strategic? He's disabling threats to others without compromising his own objective of accumulating points. He's not a brawler. He's a thinking predator. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. He'd seen quirks like this before, in the darkest corners of the underworld. Powers that thrived in darkness, that were silent and deadly. But they were almost always wielded with a chaotic, malicious glee. This boy, he was using a villain's quirk with the cold, detached precision of a special ops soldier. The potential was immense. The danger was, too, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Aizawa murmured to himself. Or perhaps a sheep who has learned to command a wolf. Izuku had 58 points. The 10-minute mark was approaching. He was moving through a wider plaza when the ground began to shake. It started as a low tremor, then grew into a ground-pounding earthquake that cracked the pavement. From behind a block of skyscrapers it rose, the zero-pointer. It was more massive, more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. It was a moving mountain of green metal and black pistons, its single red eye scanning the city below like the eye of a malevolent god. The other examinees screamed and did the one logical thing, they ran. Izuku ran too. His plan was clear, avoid the obstacle. It was worth no points. It was a trap. He was already turning into an alleyway when he heard a cry of pain. He skidded to a stop, his head whipping around. There, in the middle of the plaza, was a pile of rubble from the robot's emergence. And trapped beneath a large slab of concrete, was her Uraraka, the kind girl from the entrance. Her leg was pinned, and the zero-pointer was lumbering directly towards her, its massive foot casting a shadow that was about to become her tomb. Time stopped. The roaring crowd of panicked students, the shaking ground, the booming voice of President Mike, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. There was only the girl, the rubble, and the approaching behemoth. His mind, his cold, analytical mind screamed at him. Run. You cannot fight that. Shadow constructs are useless. It has no discernible weak points you can reach. Its armor is too thick. Survival is the priority. The subject is irrelevant. The whispers of Shadowborne, silent for so long, rose to a clear, cold, tactical suggestion in his head. Flee. Survive. He felt the familiar, tempting chill wash over him. It would be so easy to just shadow step away. To disappear. To live. But then, the sun roared to life. One for all, the warm, heavy power in his core, which he had been suppressing for the entire exam, surged. It was a tidal wave of pure, righteous fury. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. The chorus of past users screamed a single, unified, undeniable imperative in his soul. Save her! The cold logic of the shadows shattered against the blazing, incandescent will of the heroes. He looked at Uraraka's terrified face, and there was no more choice. There was no more plan. He broke into a dead sprint, not away from the robot, but directly towards it. "This is it!" he gasped, the words ripped from his lungs. He focused the entirety of his will on One for All. He felt the hurricane of power answer his call, a raging inferno searching for a release valve. He pushed it down, away from his core, into his legs. The pain was instantaneous and exquisite. It felt like his bones were being ground into dust, like his muscles were tearing themselves apart. But the power! He crouched, and the pavement beneath his feet cracked and spiderwebbed. He leaped. It wasn't a jump. It was an explosion. He shot into the sky like a green and white missile, the sound barrier breaking around him with a deafening crack. He soared impossibly high, until he was level with the zero-pointer's head. He pulled his right arm back, channeling the full, untamed, apocalyptic fury of One for All into that single limb. His sleeve disintegrated. The skin on his arm glowed with a furious red energy, veins bulging like thick cables under unbearable strain. The warm chorus of OFA became a single, deafening roar. Smash! His fist connected with the robot's faceplate. The impact was not a clang of metal. It was a detonation. A mushroom cloud of force erupted from the point of contact. The zero-pointer's head imploded, caving in on itself. The shockwave blew out every window for 3 blocks. The robot's massive body shuddered, its red eye flickered and died, and it began to topple backwards, away from Uraraka. And Izuku was falling. The world was a blurry, screaming vortex. The power of One for All vanished, leaving behind a horrifying void and a body that was utterly, catastrophically broken. His right arm was a mangled purple ruin, both his legs were shattered, twisted at unnatural angles. The pain was a white-hot nova that consumed his consciousness. His mind went dark. He was plummeting towards the concrete, a broken doll destined to become a red smear on the pavement. But even as his conscious mind shut down, some deeper, colder instinct for survival took over. Down below, his own shadow, cast on the cracked street, began to move. It was no longer a flat silhouette. It writhed, it deepened, and it rose. It stretched upwards to meet its falling master, expanding rapidly, not into a solid construct, but into something else. Something new. It became a massive, semi-solid cushion of pure darkness, 100 feet wide, its surface rippling like black, viscous water. It was a safety net woven from the void itself. Izuku hit it. The impact wasn't gentle. It was a brutal, jarring crash that sent a shockwave of cold through his already shattered body. But the shadow cushion gave way, absorbing the vast majority of the kinetic energy. He sank deep into its freezing, silent embrace, the darkness enveloping him like a cold, suffocating blanket. For a moment, he was suspended in a silent, timeless void, the pain a distant echo. Then the cushion dissolved, spitting him out. He crashed the final 15 feet onto the pavement with a sickening crunch of broken bones, but he was alive. Mangled, shattered, but alive. He lay there, a broken heap of a boy, gasping for air he couldn't quite find. Through a haze of agony, he saw a figure running towards him. Uraraka. She was free. She was safe. With a final surge of effort, she slapped the ground beside him. "Release!" she cried, and his broken body became blessedly, miraculously weightless, floating a few inches above the asphalt. The world fell silent. The other examinees stared, their faces a mixture of terror and utter, dumbfounded awe. They had just witnessed a boy leap 100 stories, destroy a colossal robot with a single punch, and then save himself from a fatal fall with a completely different, impossibly strange power. A loud, jarring buzzer echoed through the city, signaling the end of the exam. In the observation room, there was a stunned silence. The proctor stared at the main screen, which showed a slow-motion replay, the impossible leap, the apocalyptic punch, and the black, roiling mass of shadow erupting from the ground to catch the falling boy. Aizawa was on his feet, his eyes wider than anyone had ever seen them. His scarf seemed to twitch with his own agitation. Nise's teacup had a crack in it from where he'd gripped it too tightly. His usual grin was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock and something that looked terrifyingly like scientific ecstasy. "Two quirks," a random proctor whispered into the silence, summing up the thought in everyone's mind. "But that's impossible." Nise finally broke the silence, his voice a low, excited hiss. Impossible? My dear colleague, he said, his manic grin returning in full force. This isn't impossible. This is Yue Hai.